get medical care. And there's a lot of data on this. Also, there's of course the loss of the educational investment. This is estimated to be in the billions of dollars to training nurses and physicians. In fact, that's part of the problem. Health workers are the tragedy of the commons. It costs more to train health workers than technical workers in any other industry, whether it's manufacturing, law, education, agriculture. Another challenge is the loss of the earnings. Ministries of health tend to return millions of dollars to the Ministry of Finance every year because they don't have the absorptive capacity, and a lot of this is wages for vacant posts, vacant established posts. So those earnings, they're not earned, they're not spent, and they're not integrated into the economy. You also have the demoralization of the remaining staff. I can't imagine being a physician in a country watching all of my colleagues leave, and now they've left me and I have 10 times more patients. And you know, we saw during COVID a lot of attacks and anger towards health workers. So it's this vicious cycle. The more health workers leave, the more the remaining health workers want to leave. You also get inflation of health worker wages in the origin country because it's supply and demand. If you have fewer nurses, you're going to have to pay more for every nurse you know, that you want to hire, and this also leads to strikes. We currently have a strike in Kenya, and we've seen a lot more strikes. Orders of magnitude more strikes in health workers since COVID. And then one of the most important negative effects is the loss of ability to train more health workers. The Gates Foundation did a study about 15 years ago, and they looked at the largest cause of loss of African medical school professors. It wasn't retirement, it wasn't death, it wasn't movement to the private sector, it was migration. And the US actually was the #1 destination. So I think not only are we stealing the water, but we're smashing the pump because we're making it difficult for Africa to replace the health workers that we're recruiting away. And then the final negative impact on origin countries is that people get separated from their families. Every nurse that moves is a brother or a sister, an aunt or an uncle, a cousin that doesn't get to be part of their extended family in country. And so the next slide looks at the negative impacts on the destination country, because there actually are significant negative impacts on the US, the UK, through this reliance on foreign trained healthcare workers. Probably the biggest is the creation of a two-tiered healthcare system. You have the healthcare system that's staffed by the local healthcare workers, and you have the system that's staffed by the foreign healthcare workers. So, for example, in the US, you'll see a lot of Caribbean and African nurses in long-term care, senior care, which pays less, is more stressful, and you'll see the US trained nurses in the ICU and in the specialty care getting paid more, you're having higher quality of life, better access to careers. And that creation of that two-tier system does not serve anybody well. And then, of course, you have the stagnation or the lowering of wages in the destination country. That if there are large inflows, it will lower or keep the wages stagnant. It also results in underinvestment of minorities in the destination country. For example, if you look at both the US and the UK, you have high rates of unemployment for minorities, including Africans and in the US, Latinos. And so when I want to be edgy, I say that every foreign nurse in the US represents an African American or Latino that didn't get to realize her dream of being a nurse because of this chronic underinvestment that we have in educating our own minorities and our own lower income communities in the US. And then also another negative effect on the receiving countries is the perceived value of healthcare careers falls. This is particularly a problem in the UK, where I've actually heard people say, like, why would you want to go into nursing? That's something that foreigners do. And so it just in general can give a negative, like unwanted cast to those jobs, and that once again does not serve anybody well. So the next slide is the list of the categories of interventions that we can use to address health worker migration, and I'll address each of these in more detail after the rest of our speakers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tulenko. I think very extremely interesting, even for me, in terms of thinking what's the most important sector, or where do they go in terms of migration. Actually, without further ado, I think Dr. Pamela Ajaji, she's the president of the Healthcare Federation of Nigeria, representing most of the private sector in Nigeria, which literally absorbs quite a lot of the health workforce in terms of private sector. And we would love to hear from you maybe quickly around, we know a lot of Nigerian diaspora doctors do drive and have quite a lot of senior positions in the US and Canada. And what are some of the models you've seen in terms of bridging that gap, or migration, or knowledge transfer back into the country? Specifically on that, if you can speak to that, please, Dr. Ajayi. I leave the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Well, that is actually very correct. Particularly Nigerian doctors have across the globe risen to very high positions around the world. And so we have a lot of skills that have been developed. So that's one of the aspects of sort of the brain drain, which is the brain gain. There's a lot of training, a lot of development, professional development abroad. So how do we in Nigeria benefit from that? The first is a number of people do return. And the fact that they do return, they set up centers of excellence. And in Nigeria today, we have extremely good centers of excellence in cardiology, oncology, orthopedics, and so on. We even have, and when they do come back, one of the great things about it is that they impart their knowledge and stimulate a lot of growth in whatever area they've come back to develop. We even have an interventional radiologist who has already come back and has started training into people to have that. Now, some of the areas that those who are abroad do give their knowledge back include things like setting up multidisciplinary groups, using telemedicine. They set up those groups to support some of their colleagues back home. There are so many other areas. They help set up and create research grants and work with people or with their colleagues here in Nigeria and Africa, and help develop them and work with them in both academic and clinical research. There's also a lot of investment in infrastructure. By partnering with the private sector, and as I said, sometimes they come back and actually set up, apart from setting up themselves, they also help others to set up their own startups. And in particular, we find a lot of health tech startups have developed in Nigeria over the period to make sure that we can benefit from this. So there's a lot of telemedicine and a lot of systems being set up to try and even develop those systems going into the rural areas. We have a lot of e-learning and training and development using the technology and technology transfers. I also do know some people who are trying to work on actually using things like robotics and seeing, and this obviously is a futuristic, it's not happening yet, but they're working on it to say, okay, how can they use robotics? Is there any way that they can be sitting in the US, UK, and working maybe on a Da Vinci robot and actually performing surgery here in Africa? So there's a lot that is going on. In some places, obviously, we've already talked about the impact that the remittances have on not just their families, but also on the economy. There's a huge impact there. And there's a whole area around the support that they give in developing the economy. I don't know if I should stop there or if I should carry on.
If we can move on just quickly to the next panelist, and then I'll come back to you for a final question linking everything, Dr. Ajaji. Thank you so for those remarks. Absolutely. I think Nigeria is quite a leader in Africa in terms of models for, knowledge transfer, how, not only remittances, but where are some of the investments and innovations and so forth. And I would like to go back to the manufacturing industry quickly. On the panel, we have Mr. Mir Danani, who's the head of business development for Universal Corporation Limited, which is one of the oldest and largest manufacturing company in Kenya, and actually one of the few that's WHO PQ qualified. And for many of you that don't understand the healthcare industry, WHO PQ qualification requires significant infrastructures in country to enable the quality assurance of the drugs produced, but enable the companies to also export out, not only inside of the country, regionally, but also globally. And I thought, and in discussions with Mir Danani, if you can give us a short overview of your journey with Universal and what you see from a health workforce. Are you able to recruit? Where do you think investments should go to support you to scale? Mr. Mir Danani, please.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Yes, thank you for the introduction. My name is Mir Danani. We run a WHO PQ manufacturing plant in Kenya. I think I heard Calvin speak earlier, and it's very encouraging to see that the gaps that we see in industry as the same sort of gaps that he sees in academia as well. I mean, I'm going to resonate on what he says. I mean, there's fantastic talent available in Kenya, but the gap comes between university learnings against industry exposure. I mean, most graduates that come out in this field lack that industry exposure, and that makes us and lose a lot of time in training. On-the-job training is critical, and it takes up a lot of the time when you onboard the new graduates. Just for example, I mean, department-wise, from plumbing to QA to QC, what is learned in the technical colleges against vis-a-vis what we learn in industry is completely different. And how can we mitigate this, or how the investments should be, which again is similar to what Calvin said. I think we can definitely have more engagement between academia and industry, but I mean, there needs to be industry exposure, industry experience in terms of maybe working in industry or some industry projects, so that that gap is bridged between what is learned or what is taught and what is actually seen in the industry. Just to touch again, I mean, in terms of product development is one of the critical areas. I can go on many areas where we've seen gaps, but just to touch on product development, which is one of the most crucial or critical parts of pharmaceutical manufacturing. I mean, I agree that academia doesn't have enough infrastructure to support industry on those kind of projects. I mean, one example is bioequivalence of pharmaceutical development reports. It's a very expensive affair, and there definitely needs to be collaboration between industry and academia. I mean, Kenya alone does not justify taking a product to bioequivalence level. I mean, it's an extremely costly affair, and I think that's where some government funding or some donor funding needs to go into that space. The way non-communicable diseases is becoming a extremely important topic on the African continent, I do definitely see opportunities where industry and academia can work together to make sure that these drugs are produced on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mir. Thank you so much for those enlightening comments indeed. And actually this links, if I can go back to Mr. Lul Girma, who's Chief Operating Officer for Gabaya. Again, really looking, and now we're talking about industries absorbing or financing government and private sector, but really thinking also of individuals, right? The beneficiaries. How do we help them build their own talents, their own careers, know what's available out there, and really skill to the market? So we talk a lot about entities, right? But what about individuals? How do we tap into those youth that are graduated out of school? And how do we get them to be exposed to what's out there in order for them to link? So Mr. Lul, maybe you can shed some light to how that technology supports and facilitates talent development.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good question. In fact, I've been listening to each one of you, and everywhere what I hear is gap, gap, gap. So we've always been talking about, though we come from technology background, there's a huge challenge in terms of matching talent. When I say talent, any professional in any sector. So people might be talking about, for example, if I go out today to look for some professional, either it will take me 2-3 months to find them, or I don't even know where to find them. These days we go to LinkedIn or some job post, we don't have any, I would say, a structured way of finding these people, and also even providing a platform to talents coming from the universities or even the professionals that are out there. Because you have to keep upskilling, right? If I'm what I was 20 years ago, I don't think, I would have grown to this stage, right? I have to always keep on upskilling myself, growing in whichever area. So listening to you guys, I think the major thing, I just want to give a couple of examples of my own. One of the things, I come from a consulting industry back in the days where we do a lot of government projects, mostly around technology, but at the end of the day, we end up on importing talents. And we are, what, 1 billion plus population in Africa. And if we're talking about even on the technology side, which I know very well, is more than, we know that more than 1 million unemployed youth is there right now, at least in some of the largest countries. And there is, I think, a study about from IFC, if I'm not mistaken, close to more than 1 million unemployed youth in the technology space is always available, and they're graduate. They probably work in the other informal sectors. So one of the things I found is we keep on importing talents from the rest of the world. Why are we doing this? We have enough youth here. We have enough youth who's willing to grow, who's willing to learn, who's willing to fulfill those positions. We're talking about brain drain, but the youth, they have not even had a chance to get something they can start with as a junior, which is why, Gabea, our organization, has been working a lot on, incubating the youth from junior level, providing them the opportunity around training, provide job linkages globally, which has actually come to the current stage where we're creating what we call talent cloud, which in any industry that provides a community for every industry. I can give you 2-3 examples. Recently, we've launched with UNHCR